So the Apostle Paul, inspired by the Holy Spirit, writes, "Devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open up to us a door for the word, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I have also been imprisoned, that I may make it clear in the way that I ought to proclaim it. Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. Your speech must always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." When I was a teenager, specifically when I was probably ages 12 through 15, I began to go to thrift stores and yard sales and so on, and I would buy things for a really good deal, and I would then resell them on eBay or something like that. In fact, one time I found a Kermit the Frog watch. It was like $7, I think, and he happened to wear it in the movie that had just come out, so I sold it for like $230. Yeah, and when you're 14 years old, that's like $1 million. I had never seen that much money, haven't seen it since, but $240 is a lot of money. And so I got into the habit of doing that to make money for myself, but there were some hard lessons I learned from that as well. One of them was I bought this Bose piece of stereo equipment, and I had gone to list it and sell it. I probably paid $10 and sold it for $100 or something. And I'm all excited. I ship it. I'm checking the tracking. It finally gets there, and I'm like, okay, we're good. And then I get a message from the customer, and they showed me a picture of the broken stereo. And I thought, oh no, I'm out all of that money and shipping and everything else. Another time, a friend and I bought a Mac Jones autographed rookie card. For those of you who like football, he was supposed to pan out. Didn't really pan out, but he had a few good games in a row, and so his cards skyrocketed in value. So we took this card we bought together, listed it, sold it. We probably tripled what we paid at least. And I'm checking the tracking, and I'm like, why isn't it arriving where it's supposed to go? And the guy emails me. He's like, hey, where's my card? And finally, I went back and I checked, and I realized, oh no, I put the wrong address. I put an address that didn't even really exist. And you're probably thinking, well, wouldn't they just return it to you and you can send it again? Nope, I forgot the return address. So it just got lost in the void of whatever happens when stuff isn't labeled at the post office correctly, disappears. But the lesson I learned is you can have a great product, you can have great profit margin and so forth, but if it isn't delivered properly, none of that matters, because it's all going to go out the window. And we have the most important message we could possibly imagine as Christians. In our heart, soul, and mind is the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we can know the gospel and understand the gospel and even believe the gospel, but if our delivery when sharing Christ's good news with another person is not effective, then none of that's going to matter in regard to them. We are all called, commanded to share the gospel. And it's not only that we're commanded to, it's that we all can do it. There is nobody in here, regardless of age, there is nobody in here, regardless of Christian maturity, who has trusted in Christ that cannot share the gospel effectively. You can do that. You just need to learn how to successfully deliver God's message. So this is going to be a two-part sermon that will extend into next week. Today we'll be talking about the manner of delivery when sharing the gospel. And next week we will talk about the method of delivering the gospel. So the manner is what is our part? How should we present ourselves? How should we approach the situation? How should I act when going to share the gospel with somebody? The most important news we could share. And next week will be, well, what do we actually say in different situations? The method of sharing the gospel. So in order to be successful with this mission, in order to do this effectively, we have to be intentional. And so this morning, we're going to look at what the Apostle Paul here, one of the greatest evangelists to ever live, tells us about sharing the gospel. And so we will start with the manner of the messenger. And we will observe 3 manners that we can not only observe, but put into practice that will lead to effective delivery according to the Bible. You never know how many chances you're going to get to share the gospel with somebody. And it might only be one. So we cannot waste that opportunity. So the first manner to effective delivery of the gospel is to be alert through prayer. Paul says again in verse 2, devote yourselves to prayer, keeping alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving. So devote yourselves to prayer, keep alert in it with an attitude of thanksgiving. So if we want to have a successful delivery of the gospel, it starts with God. Who would have guessed? Who would have guessed that He's the first one that we should consult when sharing His good news? It's good news that we've received, but it's His message. It's God's message that we've been entrusted with. And before getting into any of these details, we have to keep in mind that it is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh can do nothing. That's what John tells us. I cannot save anybody, and neither can you. We don't have that privilege, that honor, that ability. Only the one who is both God and man could do that, and does do that. But our job is to effectively deliver that message. So it starts with consulting God. Now, if you have a prayer list or something you use at home to remember people to pray for, why don't you go home and write down a name of someone who you want to receive the gospel, who you want to have an opportunity to share the gospel with. And if someone doesn't come to mind, I would imagine they do. I have like 40 right now. If someone doesn't come to mind, ask God to bring someone to mind. He will put somebody on your heart, and He will make it happen. But it starts with prayer. Being an effective messenger starts with approaching God and consulting God. Now, the term alert here, the Greek meaning of this term is literally to stay awake, to stay watchful, and to stay diligent. We have to be intentional and awake about this prayer, and it has to result in intentionality for sharing the gospel. So be alert, stay awake. For those of you who have done a lot of traveling, if you've ever noticed when you're out of town, even just on vacation, you're like exhausted the whole week. Like you just want to go to sleep most of the time. And there's a reason for that most people don't know. It's not just because there's a lot going on vacation or on a work trip or so on. That's certainly part of it. But when you're not sleeping in your own home and when you're in a foreign environment, part of your brain, about 20% of it, actually stays awake while you're asleep. So part of your brain does not go to sleep. It's like this built-in protective system that God gave us. Dolphins and some other animals have it. But He designed us with this system that 20% of our brain actually stays awake. That's the approach that we have to have when it comes to evangelism. When it comes to approaching God on behalf of other people that we want to see saved. We have to stay alert. Our brains always have to be thinking. Our heart, soul, and mind always has to be alert in regard to the gospel. If that's not the case, we won't be effective. Satan does not take a break. There isn't going to come a time where Satan says, you know what? Yeah, sure, I've tried to wreck your life for 63 years, but God was right all along. Go ahead and worship Him. That's not going to happen right now. Maybe when every knee will bow, but that's not going to happen in your lifetime here. We have to be alert for the gospel. And staying alert, evangelizing properly, cannot be effective apart from God. So we are alert through prayer. We mentioned last week that we are not our own master. God is our master. And I am certainly not the master of salvation. I'm not even the master of lunch. But God is the master of salvation. Do you remember when Jesus' disciples went out and they were casting out demons left and right, and they get to this one boy who's demon possessed, and he's foaming at the mouth and convulsing. He's being thrown into fire and water by this demon. And the apostles go and they try to drive the demon out of the boy, and it didn't work. Do you remember why? Jesus said this type of demon, he's only going to be cast out through prayer. Some texts say prayer and fasting. Mark says prayer. It's only going to happen through prayer. You know the implication of that? The apostles went out to do God's work. They tried everything they could except consulting God. Except just praying and asking God to help. And if they did, that demon would have gone from the boy. We have a lot to do. We have a lot of gifts that were given by God, but do not go out to do God's work expecting to get it done without His help. Don't go out to do God's work and fulfill His mission trying everything you can except for prayer. Because that will return void. His word never returns void, but ours will if it is not done in His power, in His ability. So we are to be alert at all times through prayer in this regard. The other term Paul uses is devote, and this is to continually devote yourself or to continually be diligent. So it's not just a one-time approach, God. We are to devote ourselves to this just like He has devoted Himself to us. And if you are a man or a woman who is devoted to the salvation of others, then you must be a man or a woman who is devoted to prayer. Remember, it's not our message, it's God's message. We are the messenger. We are the ones who deliver it. Faith comes through hearing. So earnestly ask Him to help you deliver it. Ask Him to help you be alert and devoted. Ask Him what you should do next. So it starts with God. And in verse 3, the Apostle Paul goes on, and he says, praying at the same time for us as well, that God will open up to us a door for the word, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I also have been imprisoned. First of all, notice the Apostle Paul. This should give us comfort. The Apostle Paul, an inspired apostle with authority from God, he asks these new young believers at the church of Colossae, pray for me that I may present this clearly. That should encourage us, that if an apostle who traveled over 10,000 miles in missionary journeys, the greatest evangelist on earth aside from Christ Himself, I think, when he says, pray for me so that I may present the gospel with clarity, that should encourage us. None of us are above prayer. None of us are above God. But he says, pray specifically that God would open a door for me to share the gospel. Even in prison, he doesn't care where he is. If God gives him the ability, he will convert every guard in that prison to Christianity. That's the kind of passion the Apostle Paul had. And if you ask God to open doors to share the gospel, He is going to do it. I would challenge you to do that. Start praying, God, open a door for me to share the gospel, and I believe He will. But when He opens that door, you need to be prepared to go through that door. Even if you don't know what's on the other side, God does know what's on the other side, and He's the one with saving power. We are just the messenger. I pray for God to open doors all the time, and I'm one who believes He's constantly opening and closing doors to direct us, but I pray that He would open doors for opportunities to share the gospel. In Saturday, I was at my house. If you see my hands, there's still a little bit of grout on them. It's proof that I'm tough, and I do hard stuff. It's not fingernail. It's for a friend, okay? It's not fingernail polish. But I was doing grout in my house. I was on the kitchen, back's killing me and all that. And we hear a knock at the door, and we do the knock to get it into your brain. We hear a knock at the door, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm on the ground. I have to get ready to go to a funeral soon. I've got grout all over me. I'm just probably not going to open the door. But I have kids, so they run over to the window, lift the blinds up. They press their faces on the window and start banging on it. They know we're home. They at least know they're home. And if I don't get the door, they're calling child services. And so I decide I'm going to go answer the door. And in fact, my son would have if I didn't. We have to teach him over and over, don't do it. The other day, he wanted to open the door. My wife said, no, we're not going to open the door. It might be somebody selling something or whatever. And he says, well, what if they're selling toys? If they're selling toys, we're not buying them. How about that? But I go to open the door, and lo and behold, there are 2 Jehovah's Witnesses right there by doorstep. And I'm not one, by the way, and you shouldn't be either, to slam the door in their face. So I showed them. Oh, you showed them as the way to hell. That's not our job. So when they're delivered to your home, embrace them, love them, and then find an opportunity to share the gospel. And in this case, God worked the whole thing out because I had to leave soon, and we set up a date that they're going to come back Wednesday morning and talk to me. I didn't mean to ambush them. They don't know I'm a pastor. They just kind of said, hey, we love the Bible. I said, me too. So they're going to come over, and hopefully God will give me a good opportunity. I never pass up Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons. But if you pray for God to give you an open door to share the gospel, He will do it. Because that's what He wants. He wants us to share the good news that He died to bring about, and that He rose from the dead to bring about. But when we get that opportunity, we have to take that opportunity. We have to go through that open door, because you never know if it'll open again. At the very least, get your foot in. And next week, we're going to talk about ways to do that. We're going to talk about methods that we can use to do that. But for now, be concerned with ourselves and how we approach ourselves when walking through that door. So the first, we consult God, the first manner. But second, we are to make the most of every opportunity. If we look at verses 4 and 5, and mind you, Paul is writing from where? Prison. He's in prison for preaching the gospel. Yet he's going to make the most of his opportunity there. So in verses 4 and 5, he says that I may make it clear in the way that I ought to proclaim it. Conduct yourselves with wisdom toward outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. So we make the most of every opportunity we're given. And that's going to look different in every situation. And now when Paul uses the term outsiders here, he simply means one who does not trust in Jesus Christ. One who is outside of a saving relationship with Jesus. And that includes all of us at one point. So this term describes those who are outside the church, but that have an opportunity to come within the church. And there are a lot of misconceptions you're going to face when sharing the gospel with outsiders. And one of the most common is that a lot of people think a church in general is a place full of people who think they're good, and so they get together to talk about how they're good. And that is so far from the truth. We are people who have recognized that we are so not good, that we are so rebellious and sinful, that God went to the cross to literally die for us, to physically die for us, to redeem us. We're people who realize we could never save ourselves. We could never earn God's love in any way, and that He gives it to us freely. We are people who desperately need the gospel, not only on the day of salvation, but every day. But they don't know that unless we tell them. Because there's an enemy convincing people of all kinds of things that aren't true. And he's not going to take a break at doing that. You know, we are a people who have recognized we are desperate, and the only assurance, the only true hope of assurance is found in the sufficiency of Jesus Christ. So the goal of sharing the gospel, the goal of the gospel, is that outsiders become insiders. That outsiders in our community become insiders. That outsiders in our family, in our friend groups, in our work groups become insiders. And again, next week we'll see all 3 of those or 4 of those different scenarios look different. It's not the same approach every time, but it's always the same gospel. So we dispel the myth of a false gospel that makes somebody think, well, it's Christ plus you're pretty good so you can be saved. It's Christ plus going to church. It's Christ plus fill in the blank. That's what Colossae is dealing with. But the Apostle Paul is reminding them it is Christ alone who is sufficient to save you. And the only way to come to Him is through faith. Nothing else. So the Apostle Paul, when presenting ourselves, when making the most of every opportunity, says do so with clarity, wisdom, and conduct. Pay attention to your conduct. Pay attention to the way you present yourself. So he asks them, pray for me that I would be clear in sharing the gospel. Now, if you don't know this, there are no professional evangelists. There are no professional pastors. There are no professional Christians. There are only people who desperately recognize God's need, or our need for God, rather. He doesn't have any needs, but our need for God, and that He is going to use us on His mission. But it depends solely on His power, His willingness, and His ability. And the idea of clearness here that Paul presents, yes, it's the idea of properly and clearly, of course, presenting the gospel, but it's the idea of illumination. He says, help me, pray for me that I would illuminate the gospel, even in such a dark place. Not a watered-down version, not an incomplete version, not an inaccurate version. We have enough of that in American churches today. We don't need more. We need the true gospel, the true complete gospel. Remember, there's plenty of inaccuracy going on in Colossae that that prompts him to write this letter. They're worshiping angels. They're worshiping different forces. They're trusting in systems in addition to Christ. And anything that adds to the gospel subtracts the gospel. Salvation comes from faith and faith alone. And Paul says, pray that I would illuminate this. And if you want to illuminate the message of the gospel in somebody's life, that message of the gospel first must be illuminated in your life. Ask yourself this question. Has the light of the gospel illuminated your life? And if so, how has it illuminated your life? What does that look like in your life? You don't have to go to somebody with like a 10-page detailed essay of the gospel. Simply start by telling people what Christ has done in your own life. How has He changed your life? Look back and then look to today and ask yourself how He's changed your life. He's changed your spiritual state and mine. He has changed the way I view the world. He's changed the way I view death and eternity. The gospel changed my identity, where I'm not a wanderer in the dark anymore. I'm now a child of God, pursuing the purpose of His glory in whatever way He sees fit and that He gifts me to do. The gospel provides me and you with a solid ground to stand on in the midst of ongoing chaos in the world. There's a lot of great side effects of the gospel, but most importantly, it changed not only our view of God, but our relationship status with God. That we are now to view God as our Father, to view ourselves as part of His family, that we're redeemed and reconciled to Him. So how has the gospel illuminated your life? Start with that. Start with what you know. Words are crucial for sharing the gospel. But the gospel illuminating our life must come first, and this must be met with more than just words. It must be wisdom and conduct that we walk through that door to share the gospel with. And even if your delivery in terms of words is 100% accurate, that's not going to matter if you don't live what you preach. And no, none of us are perfect. We recognize that we're going to mess up. We're going to make mistakes. But do you have a posture of repentance? When you do something wrong, do you recognize, God, I'm sorry, I want to get back on the same page with you? Or do you just say, no, it's fine, I like to do it? Do you live out the message of the gospel? Because if not, nobody's going to listen to us. Even if we have the best pitch in the world, even if we have the greatest words. You know, Paul said, if I don't have love, I'm just a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. That's all people are going to hear if we don't live what we tell them about. So has the gospel illuminated your life? Has it changed you? Do you focus now on reflecting the things of heaven, not the things of earth? And when we do that, we are going to be effective. My grandparents used to live in Massachusetts, and near their house they had this whole big movie set up where they would film movies, and it was all these like fake houses. They were made out of like thin wood. They had like wood and stilts holding them up behind them. And like if someone were to just go and like drive into one of those things, it would fall over. We don't want to be like that when we go to share the gospel. We don't want to go proclaim the greatness and power of God and end up being like a paper house that someone just blows over because we don't live it, rather than a house built on the solid foundation of Jesus Christ. You remember when Uncle Ben said to Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility? A couple of you remember that. Now I look like a nerd. Well, we've been given great power in the gospel. We've been given great power in our gifts. We've been given a great message to proclaim. And being a Christian, it isn't just about us being saved. That's where it starts. But it comes with great responsibility. And you're going to have even more responsibility in heaven, so start practicing now. We have a lot of responsibility to focus on. And part of that responsibility is making Christ known to the community, making Christ known to those around us. And we do that through actions and through words. So conduct yourself with wisdom. You remember that quote that people don't care about how much you know until they know how much you care? That's true. They don't care about your words if you first don't care about them, and second, if you don't live those words and that message. Information is crucial and it is necessary, but it isn't enough on its own. Live what you believe and don't waste a gospel opportunity. Don't waste an open door opportunity by saying one thing and being caught living another thing. The third manner is that our speech would be seasoned with salt. And we'll explain this in a moment, but that our speech would be seasoned with salt. So if you go to verse 6, the Apostle Paul says, "Your speech must always be with grace, as though seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should respond to each person." So notice, first of all, every person is different. Responding to this person might be different than responding to that person. You know, a conversation with my wife that might look like, being understanding and talking through something might look different from me talking to one of my friends where I might say, "You're an idiot, you need to stop doing that." I might not say that to my wife, but I might say it to them. Every person is different. Every person will be reached different, and every person needs to be approached differently if we want to be effective as messengers of the gospel, if we want our delivery to be effective. And so he says, know how to answer each person and salt your words and be filled with grace. The idea of grace here, it's sort of the general usage of grace. It's the idea of politeness, of respect, of caring about the other person, and so forth. The gospel certainly does not need seasoning. We don't need to add anything to it. That would just take away from it. But the delivery needs to be seasoned. If I were to take like a nice vase and package it up to ship it, the packaging does not determine whether or not the vase is nice. The packaging just determines whether or not it's going to actually get there in one piece effectively. If I don't package it right, that's my own fault, and they're going to get the thing and it's going to be shattered, it's not going to be a vase anymore. We don't need to do anything to the gospel itself. The delivery is our job. So our delivery needs to be seasoned with salt. What does that mean? Well, if you haven't noticed, salt in the first century has not differed from salt today. It still has the same purposes. And sure, they bleach it and everything when they put it in the thing at the store for you, which is not good. But salt itself has remained the same. And salt has two purposes in this case. Salt is a preservative, and salt is a flavor enhancer. Matthew Henry, the famous commentator, he says, grace is the salt which seasons our discourse and keeps it from corrupting. So grace is a salt that seasons our discourse and it keeps it from corrupting. Now, in order to season your delivery, you must be seasoned. Now, what I mean by that is not that you have to be a veteran Christian. It doesn't mean that you can't share the gospel unless you're a Christian for 20 or 30 or 40 years or you take this or that class. That's not what I mean by seasoned. By seasoned, I mean you're a Christian who believes and lives out what you present. A seasoned Christian is simply a Christian who lives a life dedicated to Christ and his ways and wants that to overflow into everybody else's life as well. That's the goal. Remember Colossians 3, we talked about the word of Christ richly dwelling within you. Not just kind of being present, not just having some information about God, but his word, the word of Christ, richly dwelling within you. Then it can overflow to others. Now, our job is also not to attempt to make the gospel more palatable. That's called deception. We don't want to break and water the gospel down and give it to somebody when it's not the true gospel, and then when they receive it, they received something that isn't Christ. They receive something that isn't true. Our job's not to make the gospel sound easier either. The gospel contains difficult truth, that we are sinners, that we are spiritually dead in our natural state, that we are far from God, there was a chasm between us and him, and there's nothing we can do about it. That was the bad news, and we can't leave that out. But the good news is that Christ has taken care of all of that. He has sufficiently done everything necessary to redeem us. So the salt, it preserves that true gospel message so that we're bringing them the real thing, not something that can't save them. And you might remember when Paul, the Apostle Paul, was traveling in missionary journeys, he would go to all kinds of different places. He would go to synagogues, houses. He would go to places where Greek people and philosophers would all come together to think and talk. And when he went to any of those places, he didn't change the gospel at all. He changed his presentation. His delivery looked different at those different places, but he didn't change the content of the gospel. Even when he went to the Areopagus in Acts 17, and he goes to these people who just sit around and talk about philosophy. They even have this altar to an unknown God. Paul doesn't sugarcoat anything or sprinkle anything in. He says, the day of judgment's coming, so repent, turn to Christ, who raised from the dead and who can raise you from the dead. He doesn't change the content of the gospel message with his delivery, but his delivery looks different in different situations. And his delivery is always seasoned with salt and grace. So seasoning our words with salt preserves the truth of the gospel. Now the salt, again, is also, as you know, a flavoring agent. Have you ever had somebody cook something for you to be nice, and you go to eat it and you're like, this is really good, and you just can't wait to spit it out? Especially if they don't use enough salt. Well, salt is a flavor enhancer. We don't want to approach the gospel delivery like that. We don't want to give them something that they're like, thank you so much for sharing your truth, but I just want to spit it out. We don't want to present something like that. Now, people rejected Jesus to his face. If they reject the message, that's one thing. That's on them. But if my delivery is just terrible, and I didn't care enough, and I didn't conduct myself in a godly way, then that's on me, not on the gospel. Have you been to a restaurant recently and seen the salt and pepper shakers on the table? Well, if you go to a restaurant that's more of an upscale restaurant, you probably aren't going to see those on the table. You know why? Because they pride themselves on cooking the food so well that when it gets to the table, you shouldn't have to add anything. You shouldn't want to add anything. When I cooked for years, we didn't put salt on the table. We considered it an insult if people asked for salt, because it means I could have done a better job at preparing that food. That's not how we want to approach the gospel. We don't want to approach the gospel and share the gospel in a way that isn't sufficient. We want our delivery to be seasoned with salt. And in most cases, what that means is breaking it down so people can understand it. And that's where it starts with not pretending you know everything, but starting with what you know and how Jesus has even changed your life if you're a new believer or if you're new to evangelism. But we have to make it easy for them to understand. I heard a story once about a man who was at the beach, and he had a megaphone and he was doing some preaching, and he had a big group of people around him, and he was saying, Jesus is the answer, Jesus is the answer. And a guy walked up and he said, "What's the question?" People don't understand the gospel. Don't assume they know the gospel just because they were raised in a country where a lot of people go to church. We have to make it understandable for them. We show them that Jesus is the answer, but we also show them why they so desperately need Him and why we so desperately need Him. Think about if you were to go on Facebook and post a comment that says something like, believe in Jesus, it's your only chance. They're probably not going to really know what you're talking about. Yeah, sure, they've probably heard of Jesus. They're probably vaguely aware of what Christianity is, but they don't know who He truly is. Most Christians don't know who Jesus truly is. They don't know what it means to truly believe in Him. They don't know why they desperately need Him. They know He exists. I believe the Bible tells us everyone knows God exists, and they suppress that information. So they might know He exists, and they might have a knowledge of sin, but they don't know the gospel. That's why God tasks us with devoting ourselves to sharing it above anything else. It is the most important conversation you will ever have every time you have it. And you never know when a door is going to be shut, never to be opened again. So be prepared to go through that door. We have to get ourselves in order first. We have to get ourselves to make sure we're living out Christian conduct, that we're conducting ourselves with wisdom, that we're living out the message that we're preaching. And we ought to be striving to do that already, and if we are, we have to be prepared to go through that door. It may never open again for that person. So we must aggressively and alertly, full of alertness, full of devotion, approach God in prayer to consult Him first. He will tell us what to do. We must make the most of every opportunity, every open door that God provides for us, and He will provide it. Pray for me Wednesday, by the way, because I'd love to put a pebble in the shoe of those Jehovah's Witnesses, that they would come to Christ and that they would stop sharing. And think about how many doors they're knocking on to try to earn their salvation. I just want to tell them, your knuckles are going to hurt for no reason. Jesus already did all of that. He's already opened the door. So make the most of every open door and be intentional to season your words with salt, with grace, and preserve the true gospel. That is the goal. We have the greatest message in the world, in eternity, within our heart, our soul, and our mind, but nobody will know it if it isn't delivered effectively. Faith comes from hearing, and hearing comes from the one preaching it. Not just up here, but in every one of our lives, in every situation that God affords. Before we pray, you may have noticed that the mystery of Christ reference is brought up again here. Paul brings it up several times throughout the letter to the Colossians. And the idea is that this mystery of Christ, this mystery of God that for thousands of years was unknown and unseen. And Paul tells us that mystery is Christ in you, the hope of glory. That He dwells within us when we put our faith in Him. He lives within us when we trust in Him. For the longest time, they would go to worship at the temple. In the back of the temple, the most holy place was a sacred holy room where God's presence dwelled, and nobody could go or they would die. The only person back there was a high priest once a year in the Day of Atonement. Anyone else would die if they went back there. Well, when Jesus died on the cross, He tore that curtain separating us from the presence of God. He ripped it in half. He has already opened the door for you. And if you do not know Jesus Christ, if you haven't personally met Jesus Christ, you can do that now. You can trust in Him in this very moment. He desires to have a relationship with you. He did everything necessary to redeem you and to bring you to Himself. Do not wait. Trust in Him now. Go through that open door where you will spend an eternity with Him in joy and bliss. And even now, the moment you trust in Him, He will begin using you from that second onward. Ask anyone else who's come to Christ. We are not people who think we're good enough, and so we came and embraced Jesus. We're people who realize we so desperately need him that he died on a cross to save us. And he died on the cross to save you as well, to take your sins upon himself, your guilt upon himself, and in turn give you right standing before God. So I plead with you to trust in him today if you do not know him. And if you do trust in him, please come up. We would love to talk to you right over here, me and Pastor Dan. We would love to pray with you. We would love to give you a next step. But you must go through that door to trust Christ before going out those doors. And your life to the full will begin in this very moment.